Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. And in this video, it's all about the Ozarks. The Ozarks are a part of the US that I've always found to be particularly interesting. I don't know why, they just always have. The general area includes the states of Missouri, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Kansas, and Illinois, and if I'm not mistaken, the tribes of the Osage, Cherokee, and Shawnee as well. So with all those states and all that history, there's bound to be some crazy stuff happening there. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. About a year ago, I had something really freaky happen to me when I was out in the Ozarks. I was doing a long hike out there. It was 3 days and 2 nights. This was mostly to practice for a bigger hike that was in Colorado with a few friends that would happen a few weeks later. The route was a little scuffed. Missouri has beautiful forests, but not the greatest support for them. So I started bright and early day one. I was worried about tweakers at first because it is the Ozarks, but I was too far away from any real towns for them to hole up in. It was bright and hot all day. No problems that day or night. Day 2 was fine up until the early afternoon when I stopped for lunch at the base of a hill. I was tearing into some jack links when I started to hear footsteps up the hill behind me. I turn around and see nothing. It was the middle of the day and the forest was thin, so nothing could really hide from me in there. But the footsteps keep crunching and they start going in the direction of downhill. I stuff the jerky in the pack and I book it down the trail. I figured it might have been a small animal bouncing around without me seeing it. I try to push away those paranoid thoughts about a very lost mountain lion, or equally spooky tweakers, like I said, and I continue my hike. After some more time passes, I feel a little more leveled out, and I start to set up camp for night 2. This was just before sunset, and it was in the clearing at the top of a hill. I was in the middle of building a fire when I heard loud footsteps coming up the hill. I look down and see nothing. The sun is still up, so I should 100% be able to see whoever or whatever it is. I keep staring in the direction of the sounds until the setting sun catches just right on it. A shimmering shape of a person walking into the clearing. It looks like how people go invisible in movies, like in The Predator, refracting light around the body. It stopped a few steps later and knew that I could see it, because it turned and waved at me. I raised my hand back in acknowledgement, because I'm an idiot and I would be the first to die in a horror movie, but it just turned around and walked back into the forest. Nothing else happened for the rest of the trip. What the hell was that? Has anyone else seen this invisible man, or was I the tweaker all along? This is a true story that my father told me. It happened to him back in 2018. So, my father was pretty deep in the woods. He's 57 years old, and he was an avid hunter. He was not scared by pretty much anything, and didn't believe in the paranormal. So he was leaving the house for the evening hunt during the firearm deer season. In an evening hunt, you go out to the stand at about 3 to 4 p.m., and you stay there until there is no light left. I usually find an excuse to get out of the stand early, but my dad is known by us and his friends to be the last one back to the house. He had seen a few does, but no bucks that day, and he decided not to take one yet. In classic dad fashion, he stayed until complete darkness had set in, the kind of darkness where you can't even make out your hand in front of your face. Only then did he begin to pack his stuff up, and then the next part here is exactly as he described it to me. He says, the woods went completely silent out of nowhere. Not like there just wasn't any noise, but like everything in nature knew not to make a sound right now. No wind, no squirrels, nothing. Just as I started to think about how weirdly quiet it got, all of a sudden, I heard a large stick break directly underneath me, but I did not hear any rustling leaves or sounds of an animal at all. After about 30 seconds, something directly below the stand made a sound that I can only describe as a multi-tone scream, so loud that it made my ears go to white noise fuzz. I have heard a lot of different animals in the wild, and nothing that I've ever come across has the ability to make this call, not even a human. As soon as the creature had finished its harrowing call, this stench began. It was like the unique smell that only comes from a landfill mixed with heavy sulfur. I turned on my headlamp to see just what was lurking below me, and all I saw was a black figure move at a speed that seemed physically impossible. I started frantically shining my light in the direction that the figure moved towards, and at the tree line, I saw a set of reflective eyes looking back at me directly. The black figure behind the eyes was larger than any other animal that I've seen in the Ozarks, aside from maybe a very large cow, but this wasn't fat like a cow. It was lanky and had unruly fur that seemed to stick out in all directions. On top of its head, it had two large, slicked-back, twisted horns, similar to that of an old male goat. The eyes were easily 7 feet or 2.2 meters off the ground, meaning this was taller than any native species in the area. It just sat there, breathing heavily and staring at me for what felt like an eternity. I kept my headlamp pointed at the creature until it turned and walked away into the woods. That's when I got the call from my dad to pick him up on the UTV and get him the hell out of there. This is the only time that my dad has ever sounded anything close to being scared to me. He still hunts all the time and says that he wants to see this thing again and hopefully get a better look at it. Classic tough guy dad thing to say. He thinks that he may have seen an Ozark Bigfoot that night. After all, my dad has been very into Bigfoot research after this. I, on the other hand, believe that he may have had a run-in with an Ozark Howler. So I live out here in the Ozarks. At that time, I had been having trouble sleeping, and I started taking night drives to calm my nerves. Sometimes I would end up sleeping on the side of the road for a little while. This specific night, it was September, I drove down a road that I loved that goes near a large tributary river and has a small parking lot, as it used to be part of our national park here. I started to experience a little chill, but on my truck, the outside temperature gauge had stayed the same temperature. I didn't think much of it, and I was getting tired, so I had a can of Vienna sausages and a couple crackers and went to sleep. When I woke up, it was dawnbreak, but where I had parked had tree cover and was shaded. I felt even colder than I had last night. I looked at the temperature gauge. It was now reading a few degrees warmer than it had at night. I brushed my eyes. Then I see the tree cover is completely lit up by what looked like old LED headlights that have been banned here for a while because they cause car accidents. I look back through the cab and I see this old black Pontiac Firebird, blue LED lights, and it was immaculate looking, shiny as hell, and brand new. I just sit and look at it for a bit. Then I go to get out of the car to greet whoever was in the Pontiac. When I stepped out of my car, it was bone-chillingly cold, absolutely freezing. I turned to face the Pontiac, and it's gone, completely gone, vanished. I get back into my truck immediately and drive the hell out of there. On the way back, I started getting a severe headache. The rest of the day, it got worse, and I began to feel ill. But it went away that night. The longer I was away from there, the better I felt. Never been down that road or slept in my truck out here since. Okay guys, this is a story that happened to me in 2017. This is completely true, and I'm going to type it out as best as I can remember. So I was 20 years old. I was a bit of an outdoorsman, and going in the woods for a weekend camping trip with my friends at a private property they owned sounded like paradise to me. Anyways, it was mid-June in the Truman Lake, Ozarks area of Missouri. The first night, we arrived after dark, set up camp and grabbed some food, and then just headed to bed. The next day, we were doing normal, deep-in-the-woods activities, and some people leave, so the only people that are left are myself, my friend Jay, his brother Henry, and his brother's friend, Lee. Later on that night, we're all sitting by the fire. Henry passes out drunk and is placed in a small cabin. Jay then goes to bed in his Jeep. Lee and I are chilling by the fire, just talking, shooting the shit. It's around 11:30. I started drinking myself. I hear rustling around in the woods, and then I notice that it's like somebody flipped a switch and everything in the forest was muted. This is other than us, the fire, and the rustling. There were no birds, crickets, or tree frogs. Very strange. Immediately, I drink a Red Bull and water to try and sober myself up so I can think clearly. The rustling returns and turns into what sounds like tiny footsteps, similar to how little kids run around, with that little pitter-patter sound. I keep hearing running coming from around where the cars are located. I grab my flashlight, shining in the woods, to try and get closer to the tree line. I hear it on occasion, but it always seems to be just inside the tree line and just outside the beam of my flashlight, so I can't see anything. I walk back to the fire. 40 minutes or so, I hear a loud banging of logs by the cabin and then more running. The hairs stand on end as I jump up with Lee and I yell, "Who's there?" The running and banging immediately stop. Every single thing around us, except the fire, is completely silent again. I notice a musky, damp smell in the air, and I immediately go and grab my AKM pattern rifle with the big flashlight on it and load up 1000 lumens. I put on my hearing protection with amplified 3-dimensional sound. I listen for a long time, but I get nothing but slight static coming from areas where sounds could be heard. I don't hear anything for another half hour. I begin to relax and talk to Lee some more. Suddenly, something large seems to be moving around the cabin and a little pitter-patter running by the cars. I flip off the safety and fire a warning shot into the woods and scream that this is private property and we will shoot. We're hoping it's just some random hobos who will leave once they realize that we have a gun. There's no sounds anymore, but that smell and nasty musky odor remains. An hour and a half pass with no sounds, and eventually we seem to almost become nose blind to the smell. And while we're sitting there, all of a sudden it sounds like a brush pile is getting dragged through the woods by something massive. I jump up immediately, flip off the safety, and turn on the flashlight, and fire another shot into the woods. I don't hear anything for another hour or so, when suddenly something large comes crashing through the woods by the cabin once again. This time again, I jump up and grab a headlamp and turn it on, as well as the one on my rifle, and I walk down the path to the shooting range, and all I can smell is that intense, musky odor, to the point that I'm nearly gagging. I stop by where the bathroom would be, and I begin scanning the area. My rifle light pans across what looks like a 7-foot tall bipedal creature covered in thick, matted fur sprinting through the woods, and I think, what in the unholy F? I open fire towards where I see it running while I run back toward the camp, screaming out loud, WTF. I'm trying as quick as I can to reload and keep my rifle pointed at the tree line. Lee is freaking out and asking what's happening, while I'm too startled to even speak. Eventually, nothing happens for a long time after, so I tell him, and shortly after, all the normal forest noises return. At around 2 a.m. or so, Lee goes into the cabin to try and sleep. We still haven't heard anything new since when I shot at it. Around 4, I get into my hammock. I have a moment of total dumbassery and think that nothing more will happen. I set my rifle against a tree. I was about to fall asleep when I notice, once again, all the sounds have left the forest. There was no sound at all except for the fire. Immediately, I feel anxiety and dread wash over me as I am fully awake, hyper-aware of everything around me. I hear that pitter-patter around my hammock, no shorter than 5 feet from me. I'm internally screaming, but frozen in fear. I hear large footsteps start to slowly get closer to me as I'm overwhelmed by that musky odor. They stop right outside my rain tarp, and I can see the tarp be depressed inwards as if something is touching it or pushing on it. It begins to slide its hand lower and lower down the tarp. I'm thinking, this is actually how I die. I regret not sleeping with the rifle. Eventually, it just stops and begins to walk away. I can't smell anything anymore or hear it. As I'm laying in my hammock, about 20 minutes later, I hear a large tree fall down in the middle of the woods from what sounded like about 100 feet away. The sun started to rise, and everything around me returns to normal, and I finally am able to fall asleep. I leave the area the next day. I regret not being more accurate and maybe hunting that thing. I still go back to this property regularly in the hopes that one day I can find it again and capture it on the multiple trail cams that I have set up, or even better, just shoot the thing. I swear to you that all this is completely true and was by far the scariest thing that I've ever experienced in my life. My thinking is that all the pitter-patter footsteps were likely some kind of paranormal instance due to how they affected my electronics. And the other thing, I'm not quite sure. I've never believed in Bigfoot or any of that shit, but I don't know anymore. Everything seems possible now. This story is something that happened to me and my friends years ago. I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm an avid hunter there due to the very nice wilderness. One day, I get a text from my cousin in central Missouri. A little backstory. His dad got a very good job here in Pennsylvania, and then he got a promotion, which resulted in him going back out there. The last time I was in Missouri was about 6 years prior to this, on a visit with this same crew of guys. Basically, my cousin invited me to go to the Ozarks on a hunting trip, as we haven't seen each other in quite a while. A few weeks later, we arrived. After greeting my cousin, we drove around the woods and stuff. He brings his friends along. We go back to the house after a few hours of just driving around and talking, and we head back to their house. My cousin's house is off of a back road and has a few buildings on the property. It has one 2-story home and one, quote, guest house, which is quite literally just a cabin, and then there's a few sheds. It wasn't until the next day that we went on our morning hunt. We really didn't see that much, other than just a few deer. On our way back, however, we spot a fast-moving animal off the trail that we were using. My cousin slams on the brake of the ATV that we were using. My friend points it out. After a moment of confusion, we realize that it was nothing but a mountain lion. We went back to his house and relaxed for the rest of the day. By nightfall, we went out to go camping in the wilderness. They own another cabin that's on the slope of another hill. By about 6 p.m., we reach this cabin. We enter and we set up the beds and stuff. Myself, my cousin, and 2 friends of his, which I will call Jack and Nathan. The next day, we go do some exploring again, but we keep our guns on us. After the mountain lion, you can never be too safe. So, we reach the top of this hill. It overlooks a pretty big valley. I decide to move down the hill and into this valley. We brought along camping supplies with us in case we were very late getting back and we were to camp there. After a few hours of hiking, Jack insists that we take a rest for a while. My cousin wants to go out and find water and stuff. It's starting to get dark by this point, so we decide that we'll have to camp on a creek bed. While trying to find a creek, I hear sticks cracking around 100 feet behind us. At first, I was thinking that it was that mountain lion from earlier. I pull out my M9. I see something big run across the path. It's black, almost the same size as a bear, but it was stocky, built like the lion that we saw earlier. I tell the group. They say that we should just keep moving. I listen to them, but I keep my pistol out. We eventually reach a creek bed. Despite seeing that weird thing in the woods, this looks like the best spot that we're going to find to make a camp that night. Jack and I start to set up the tents while my cousin and Nathan go gather wood. Jack goes to a brush line to take a piss. My cousin and Nate come back from gathering wood. They say that they saw the same thing that I had seen earlier. They said that they were on a hill and saw it in a dip below them. They asked me to re-describe what I saw, so I did. And then they asked me if it had horns when I saw it. And I think, well, I didn't see any, but that's not to say that it didn't. We end up catching some fish and even get a rabbit. We eat and then head off to bed. Sometime in the night, we all wake up to rumbling. It's thunder, but there wasn't supposed to be a thunderstorm today. It starts to pour rain. I get out of my tent. That thing is across the creek. It howls. It reminds me of almost like a coyote, but deeper and something else in there as well. My friends get up and come out of their tents too. Jack pulls out his .270 and takes a shot. After Jack shot at it, we ran. We could hear the thing howling over top of the thunder and the wind and rain. We make it back to our cabin, almost what felt like barely, but I don't think the thing chased us. We slam the door. We stay in the cabin overnight. We go back to the site the next day. Everything is tore up, tossed around and destroyed. We clean up the best we can and get back to his house. I head back to Pennsylvania shortly after, but I still don't know what the hell we saw. What do you think it was? I know that mountain lions are rare in the Ozarks, but I've never heard of some type of bear cryptid with horns. What the hell? So, those were pretty crazy, weren't they? If you had one in specific that stuck out to you, then feel free to say which one it was in the comments. Do you have a story of your own? As always, there's an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Down there as well is the donation button of a super thanks and a PayPal and a Patreon in the description. And I figured that someday I'd like to go visit the Ozarks and just see the sights. And I know there's people out there who would be like, oh, why would you want to go see a mountain range? And I'm like, there's going to be some crazy geological stuff there to see too. Hopefully I don't get like clapped by a cryptid out in the woods, but you never know. It might make for good content. Maybe I'll get an interview out of it beforehand. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, then feel free to like and subscribe and share the video and all that stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump, and thank you for watching.